Well, good morning, everybody, and welcome to week number 4 of our journey with Jesus to Jerusalem. I'd like to welcome our people who are here with us in the cafeteria today, people who are with us online. You'll notice we're in a little bit of a different setting today. We're in the school cafeteria because I guess the Meehan Center is being used for other things. But welcome to our program this week. So just a little bit of a recap of where we've been. So on week 1, we did some background in terms of who are the Romans, who are the Essenes, who are the Sadducees, who are the Pharisees. What was the context of Jesus' passion and death? Week 2, we looked at some of the biblical passages where Jesus was getting in trouble with the Jewish religious authorities. What is it that got Jesus in trouble and ultimately got him killed? Last week, we began the story of Jesus' passion, and if you remember, we focused on the Last Supper and its connection with the Hebrew Passover, and also the fact that in Jesus' first trial before the Jewish authorities, he was convicted of blasphemy. Right? He was convicted of blasphemy, which according to the law of Moses is a crime punishable by death. And that's where we left off last week, so that's where we're gonna pick up today. Also, for next week, we will be back in the Meehan Center, and for those who are online, we'll be live streaming at the same time. And next week's topic is what happens to us when we die. Right? So we're going to talk about Jesus' death today, but what does that mean for us? So that's what we'll be talking about next week. And there are some readings from the Catechism. They're not available online yet. I have a note to send them to Jill in the parish office, and she will post those, and she will post the notes online early this week. So please feel free to go to the website, the parish website, simonandjude.org. Go to What's Happening, Journey with Jesus to Jerusalem, and the information is there. All right, so today we are picking up with the story of Jesus' passion and his death. And again, like we did last week, we'll read through the story, and then I'm going to interrupt myself numerous times to kind of fill in some details and kind of talk about what's kind of in the background. What is it that the original audience would have understood? So for those of you who have your Bibles, we're going to actually start today in John's Gospel. Right? So if you got John's Gospel, we'll be in chapter 18, and we're going to start on verse 28. Right? So John 18, verse 28, and it should say the trial before Pontius Pilate. Right? So everybody there, those who have a Bible. All right, so again, you remember last week Jesus was arrested. He was brought in front of the Sanhedrin, the Jewish religious court. The court convicted Jesus of blasphemy. Blasphemy, is that a religious charge or a political charge? It's a religious charge, all right? So Jesus has been convicted by the Sanhedrin, but for the Romans, do the Romans really care about Jewish religious law? No, they don't. They don't care at all, right? So, the Jewish religious authorities need the Romans to put Jesus to death. They didn't have the power to do that, but they need to bring Jesus to the Roman governor, Pontius Pilate, to have Pilate hopefully convict Jesus and then sentence him to death. So this is where we are. So starting at verse 28. Then they, the religious authorities, brought Jesus from Caiaphas, the high priest, to the praetorium. It was morning, and they themselves did not enter the praetorium in order not to be defiled, so that they could eat the Passover. I'll stop there. Anybody know what the praetorium is? Anybody? Anybody online? So the praetorium is essentially Pilate's residence, his headquarters, right? And in Jewish religious law, if you entered the headquarters or the house of a pagan, that made you ritually impure. And if you're ritually impure, you couldn't celebrate the Sabbath or the Passover. We recognize the Passover is coming up very quickly. So again, the authors here are giving an interesting juxtaposition here. Here the religious authorities are seeking to get to get a sentence of death for Jesus, but they themselves won't enter the praetorium because they don't want to be ritually impure. They want to uphold the law of Moses. It's kind of an interesting kind of back and forth here. So Pilate came out and said to them, "What charge do you bring against this man?" They answered and said to him, "If he were not a criminal, we would not have handed him over to you." At this, Pilate said to them, "Take him yourselves and judge him according to your law." Right? Again, Pilate is demonstrating, hey, this is a religious issue. I don't care about your religious issues. Right? All I care about is keeping the peace and collecting taxes. This is what I'm concerned with, not your laws. The Jews, the Jewish religious authorities, answered him, "We do not have the right to execute anyone, in order that the word of Jesus might be fulfilled, that he had said, indicating the kind of death he would die." So Pilate went back to the praetorium, summoned Jesus, and said to him, "Are you the king of the Jews?" Keep that title in mind, because we're going to come back to that. King of the Jews is going to be very, very important in a little bit. "Are you the king of the Jews?" Jesus answered, "Do you say this on your own, or have others told you about me?" Pilate answered, "I am not a Jew, am I? Your own nation and the chief priests handed you over to me. What have you done?" Jesus answered, "My kingdom does not belong to this world. If my kingdom did belong to this world, my attendants would be fighting to keep me from being handed over to the Jews. But as it is, my kingdom is not here." So Pilate said to him, "Then you are a king." Jesus answered, "You say I am a king. For this I was born, and for this I came into the world, to testify to the truth. Everyone who belongs to the truth listens to my voice." Pilate said, "What is truth?" When he had said this, he again went out to the Jews and said to them, "I find no guilt in him, but you have a custom that I release one prisoner to you at Passover. Do you want me to release to you the king of the Jews?" They cried out again, "No, not this one, but Barabbas." Now Barabbas was a revolutionary. All right, so we're going to stop here for a minute. In fairness to Pontius Pilate, from what we read here, did Pilate want to execute Jesus? No, he didn't. Right? Pilate, for whatever he may have been, now he's a Roman governor, probably did whatever the Roman worship was. But if anything else, Pilate was somewhat of a just man. The religious authorities bring this guy to him. They want Pilate to execute him, but Pilate's saying, for what? There's nothing here. I find no guilt in him. Right? So again, keep this in mind. Pilate initially does not want to execute Jesus. Now we're chapter 19 for those of you who have your Bibles. Then Pilate took Jesus and had him scourged. Now again, this is one of those things that the biblical stories kind of quickly jump over this. But what we're talking about is scourging is a whipping. And I don't know how many people saw the Mel Gibson movie Passion of the Christ. Right? You get an idea of what a scourging is. It's not anything fun. Right? But Pilate has Jesus scourged. And the soldiers wove a crown out of thorns and placed it on his head and clothed him in a purple cloak. They came out to him and said, "Hail, King of the Jews!" And they struck him repeatedly. Once more Pilate went out and said to them, "Look, I am bringing him out to you so that you may know that I find no guilt in him." Again, Pilate is emphasizing this guy's done nothing wrong. Right? I don't know what you want me to do with him. He hasn't done anything wrong. He has not broken any Roman law. Right? So Jesus came out, wearing the crown of thorns and the purple cloak. And he said to them, "Behold the man." When the chief priests and the guards saw him, they came out. "Crucify him, crucify him." Pilate said to them, "Take him yourselves and crucify him. I find no guilt in him." So now the third time. And Pilate is emphasizing, this guy hasn't done anything. He hasn't violated any law. The Jews answered, "We have a law of Moses, and according to that law he ought to die because he made himself the Son of God." Again, they're still emphasizing the blasphemy charge. Now when Pilate heard this comment, he became even more afraid. And he went back into the praetorium and said to Jesus, "Where are you from?" Jesus did not answer him. So Pilate said to him, "Do you not speak to me? Do you not know that I have the power to release you and I have the power to crucify you?" Jesus answered him, "You would have no power over me if it had not been given to you from above. For this reason, the one who handed me over to you has the greater sin." Consequently, Pilate tried to release him, but the Jews cried out, "If you release him, you are not a friend of Caesar. Everyone who makes himself a king opposes Caesar." All right, we'll stop here for a couple seconds. Two important things going on here. All right, so Pilate does not want to execute Jesus, but he's feeling the pressure of the crowd. He's feeling the pressure from the authorities, and he's trying to figure out what's going on. And he's becoming probably more and more afraid of what could happen if he doesn't act. If you go back to Matthew, there's actually a line where Pilate's wife sends him a message and says, "Don't have anything to do with this guy. I got a bad feeling about this." But Pilate, moves forward, right? He recognizes something's going on here that he doesn't really understand, and he doesn't want to execute Jesus. But then the Jewish religious authorities do something very interesting, and it's in this last verse that we just read. Consequently, Pilate tried to release them, but the Jews cried out, "If you release him, you are not a friend of Caesar. Everyone who makes himself a king opposes Caesar." All right, so let's go back to this language where Pilate asked Jesus, "Are you the king of the Jews?" And Jesus' basic response is kind of, yes, he is. What the Jewish religious authorities do essentially is change the charge. Right? Blasphemy is going nowhere. Right? The charge of blasphemy is Pilate doesn't care. But what does Pilate care about? Well, Pilate would be very interested, or would care a lot about, the charge of treason. And that's what they're talking about here. Right? If you release him, you are not a friend of Caesar. Everyone who makes himself a king opposes Caesar. So what the Jewish religious authorities do is they change, in a sense, the charge from King of the Jews being a religious claim to being a political claim. Right? And if you claim to be the king, then you are the rival of Caesar. That is treason, according to Roman law. And according to Roman law, what's the punishment for treason? Death. Death by what? Death by crucifixion. Exactly. Right? So the Jewish religious authorities have Pilate in a bind here. Right? They're saying, "Okay, Pilate, here's the deal. You either convict Jesus for treason and sentence him to death, which is what you're supposed to do under Roman law, or if you don't, what are we going to do? Well, we're going to go and send an email, well, not really an email, or a text, to Caesar in Rome and say, 'Hey, Caesar, guess what? There's this guy Jesus running around in Judea who claims to be the king of the Jews, and Pilate did nothing about it.' What's going to happen to Pilate when Caesar finds out about this? He's going to be executed. Exactly. He's going to be executed. So Pilate's between a rock and a hard place here. He doesn't want to sentence Jesus to death, but in the end, he really has no choice. Right? Because of the political nature of the title King of the Jews. When Pilate heard these words, he brought Jesus out and seated him on the judge's bench in a place called Stone Pavement, in Hebrew Gabbatha. It was a preparation day for the Passover and it was about noon. And he said to the Jews, "Behold your king." They cried out, take him away, crucify him." Pilate said to them, "Shall I crucify your king?" Notice this line. And the chief priests answered, "We have no king but Caesar." Interesting. Very interesting line there. Then he handed him over to be crucified. All right. So again, I think John's gospel does the best job of portraying what happened to Jesus. Religious charge isn't going to stick, so what do? We change it into a political charge. And Pilate's hands are tied. And in the end, Pilate has really no choice but to sentence Jesus to death. Right? Yes, no? Oh, we had a question back there.
So the crowd outside the praetorium is not necessarily the general public because they were disappointed in Jesus as they saw that were, I mean, I guess I always thought when they said the crowd, I thought that it was the general public, but it really wasn't.
The question for those on Facebook is, who was the crowd outside? Was it the people who would have known Jesus and who would have supported him, saw the miracles and things he did, or was it the religious authorities? Again, great question. I don't think we know exactly who was there, but certainly those who had Pilate's ear was the religious authorities. They were the ones who came to Pilate, and they were the ones who had his ear and who made the argument that ultimately swayed the day. Yeah. All right. So if you got, again, for those who have their Bibles, we're not going to flip back to Matthew. All right. So if you got your Bibles, Matthew chapter 27, and we're going to start at verse 33. All right. So we were in Matthew through the arrest, through the trial in front of the Sanhedrin, and then we jumped over to John for the trial before Pilate, and now we're going to jump back to Matthew. And again, really like Matthew's gospel, because again, the audience of Matthew's gospel is a former Jewish community. Right? So they would be very familiar with Old Testament imagery, and you see this with the crucifixion here. Okay. So starting at verse 33. Okay. And when they came to a place called Golgotha, so Jesus has been given his cross, or at least the cross beam, and he's being paraded through the city. And when they came to a place called Golgotha, which means place of the skull, they gave Jesus wine to drink, mixed with gall. But when he had tasted it, he refused to drink. After they crucified him, they divided his garments up by casting lots. Then they sat down and kept watch over him there. Let's stop for a second. Let's talk a little bit about what crucifixion is, or what actually happened, right? Or what's believed to have happened, right? So Jesus is convicted by Pontius Pilate. He is sentenced to death. Does anybody know where physically would executions be carried out? Outside the gate, exactly, right? So Jerusalem, like many ancient cities, was built, had a wall built around it for defensive purposes. But people had to go, for commerce and everything, and go from city to city, and so there were gates. And what the Romans did, as many others did as well too, if you were going to exercise justice, in this case, if you were going to crucify people, you're going to want to do it in a very public place, because again, crucifixions were meant to be examples, right? You break the law, this is what's going to happen to you. So the crucifixions would happen outside the city gates, just outside the walls of the city. So you can kind of picture the scene. Jesus is at the praetorium. He is sentenced to death, and he leaves the praetorium. Many scholars believe that the condemned person would be forced to carry it, like the horizontal crossbeam. It wouldn't be carrying the whole, the entire cross, which is what is commonly depicted. But the person may be carrying the crossbeam, and that person is paraded through the city. Right? You got to get from the praetorium to the place where they execute you outside of the city, and and the Roman soldiers are laughing and probably spitting on you, and people are laughing at you and yelling at you and doing all of these things. You get outside the city, right? The first thing they do is what? What do they do to your clothes? You're stripped. You're taken away. Now, most crucifixes that we have, Jesus has a piece of cloth strategically placed around his waist. Yeah. All right? You were crucified completely naked. And again, the point of crucifixion, it was supposed to be as humiliating as possible. That's one way to do it. Again, an example. Right? Then they, put Jesus on the cross, and then, either nailed or tied. Now I know there's controversy and discussion about, did nails go through Jesus' wrists? Did they go through his palms? We don't know. We don't know for sure. It could be both. I heard something recently that in very early depictions of crucifixion, actually the person was tied to the horizontal piece, and so a nail could go through their palm. But We don't know for sure. But all of this stuff is happening. So imagine Jesus, who's God, right, being paraded by human beings who he created, outside the city gates, stripped naked. And by the way, his mother's there, along with some of the women. His apostles had all abandoned him. And he is stripped naked, thrown down on a cross, tied and or nailed, or both, to the cross and strung up. Right? And you're there to die. Anybody know, how is it that you would die through crucifixion? What are some of the ways? Because there's multiple different ways that crucifixion could bring about death. Give me a way that crucifixion. Well, let's hold on to that one at the end. But earlier than that, what are some of the ways that death could occur? Shock. Absolutely, from a loss of blood, a loss of fluids. Right? Imagine the person, you're very strained, or you're very stressed. Let's put it that way, a very stressful situation for the person. Jesus has been whipped, he's lost blood, he's lost other fluids, right? From shock. Give me another way death could occur.
Loss of blood.
Loss of blood, particularly, and I've never really understood this. Maybe if there's a physician here, if nails go through your wrist, it would seem that you would hit an artery and you would bleed out pretty quickly, but certainly loss of blood. Think also of the fear. Just at the end, could one, knowing what's going to happen to you, could one have a heart attack? That would probably be the most merciless, or merciful, I should say, way to die. And then lastly, there's the suffocation, which some people are starting to question. I've heard people actually questioning whether this happened or not. But if you're on a cross, and I have to hold the microphone up so you can hear me, but if you're in this position with both arms spread out, and you're holding yourself up by your legs, if the soldiers come with a sledgehammer and break your shins, which is what they do, there's nothing supporting you. And physiologically, one would suffocate. So there's all sorts of, I wouldn't say all sorts, but there are different ways that crucifixion can end up in death. None of them nice, right? Again, crucifixion was, the Romans perfected this. This was the way, the most humiliating, frankly, the most disgusting way to end someone's life. And this is why they did it. So I had.
Yeah, I have a question that has nothing to do. Was it in his hand or was it in his?
So the question is, what did the nail go through his hand or through his wrist? There is debate on both sides of the spectrum. If the nails went through his wrist and there was nothing else supporting him, that would seem to be problematic because your wrist is not going to, your palm is not going to support your weight, whereas your wrist might. But as I was saying a bit earlier, there are some depictions of early crucifixions, some of the earliest depictions of crucifixions, I should say, depict people actually being tied and with a nail through the palm. So we don't know exactly what was going on. But that's what crucifixion is, and so keep this in mind. The biblical accounts don't really describe this in any great detail. And interestingly, I heard a recent podcast on this, Roman literature doesn't really describe crucifixions either, because it was so gruesome. And so, again, part of the reason why we have these, people, was it wrist, was it palm, whatever, is that the Romans themselves really didn't give us a lot of graphic understanding of what a crucifixion was. So, anyway, moving on from there. So let's go back with all of this in mind. I'm at verse 35. After they had crucified him, they divided his garments by casting lots. Then they sat down and kept watch over him. And they placed over his head the written charge against him. This is Jesus, King of the Jews. 2 revolutionaries were crucified with him, one on his right and the other on his left. Those passing by reviled him, shaking their heads and saying, "You who would destroy the temple and rebuild it in 3 days, save yourself. If you are the Son of God and come down from the cross, if you are the Son of God, come down from the cross." Likewise, the chief priests and the scribes and elders mocked him and said, "He saved others, but he cannot save himself. So he is the King of Israel. Let him come down from the cross now, and we will all believe in him. He trusted in God. Let him deliver him now that he wants to. For he said, I am the Son of God. The revolutionaries who were crucified with him also kept abusing him in the same way. Interestingly, a little bit of a difference in Luke's gospel with the two people who were crucified with Jesus. Anybody know the story in Luke? Anybody? Mike? Show us your diaconate formation at work here.
The one thief asked for repentance.
Exactly. Yeah, in Luke's gospel, the two people who were crucified with Jesus, one of them mocked him. In Matthew here, both of them mocked him. But in Luke's gospel, one of them mocked him, and the other person turned to him and said, Jesus, remember me when you come into your kingdom. I mean, what a statement of faith. I've always had a lot of respect for that guy. I mean, imagine you're being crucified, and you're being crucified, and you turn to the guy you're being crucified with, and you profess faith in him. You say, Jesus, remember me. Wow. And Jesus' response is fantastic. He said, before the day is over, you'll be with me in paradise. Good for him, right? But again, it's a difference in the Matthew story versus the Luke story. From noon onward, picking up now at verse 45, from noon onward, darkness came over the whole land until 3 p.m. At about 3 o'clock, Jesus cried out in a loud voice. Anybody want to take that? How's your Aramaic? No, nobody wants to take that. Cried out in a loud voice, Eli, Eli, lema sabachthani, which means, my God, why have you forsaken me? Anybody know what Jesus is citing here? Psalm 22, right? And again, a Jewish audience, a former Jewish audience, would recognize this immediately. Jesus is quoting Psalm 22. That was going to be the dollar question of the day, Mike, but I'm glad I didn't do that. All right? My God, why have you forsaken me? Some of the bystanders who heard it said, this one is calling for Elijah. Immediately, one of them ran to get a sponge. He soaked it in wine, and putting it on a reed, gave it to him to drink. But the rest said, wait, let us see if Elijah comes to save him. Jesus cried out again. In a loud voice, he gave up his spirit. And so he died. Now, some of the other biblical accounts have different wording. It is finished. Different gospel accounts have different final words of Jesus. But in Matthew's, Jesus' final words is, Eli, Eli, lema sabachthani.